Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. It is raining right now here, matching the national mood. What else is happening here in Los Angeles? I just saw a next door post. Someone, the poster was saying that someone was masturbating in front of them on the street. Again, matching the national mood of the worst people in the world just doing whatever they want in public. Well, folks, that's enough of the news. You got the weather here in Los Angeles specifically, and you got the police blotter. Great episode today. This is Jamie McKelvie. If you don't know who Jamie is, I don't know why you don't know that, but if you don't know, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Born in London, artist Jamie McKelvie came to prominence in the world of comics through his collaborations with Kieran Gillen, a former guest on Beginnings. Check that one out a couple years ago. In 2003, the two started a comic strip in PlayStation Magazine that lasted for 3 years. This led to their book Phonogram in 2006 and its subsequent sequels, as well as Young Avengers and The Wicked plus The Divine. Do you say and or plus? I never said that out loud. He's also illustrated stories and designed characters for Marvel on books like Cable, The Defenders, X-Men, Captain Marvel, and Ms. Marvel, among others, and created art for bands such as Churches, Art Brute, and Tegan and Sarah. And speaking of Churches, not on this podcast, but on the one my wife and I do, Couples Therapy, Lauren Mayberry's been on that, so check that out. I feel like I'm giving a lot of editorial notes, like in the bottom of a panel on a comic book. Check out this other issue. Where was I? Most recently, Jamie has been writing and drawing his own series, One for Sorrow, which is being published by Desultory. I think that's how you pronounce it. D-S-T-L-R-Y. Well, this was exciting. I've been a fan of Jamie's art for a long time. What is this, 2025? So, decades now? What's that? Decades now? And Jamie was very open. I think when I first wrote him, he was like, hey, you know, I have ADHD, which we talk a lot about in this episode. And I think what I thought was very interesting was we get into kind of the existential, the philosophical dimension of an ADHD diagnosis. It was like, I don't know if I really remember a lot of my childhood, but well, he did. We got into it. This is good. I hope you like this one. Coming up on the show, stay tuned. Stay tuned. A lot more comics people, both indie and mainstream. Daniel Warren Johnson, Anders Nilsson, Jeffrey Lewis. We got some great musicians, Bob Mould, Tina Halliday from Sheer Mag. Holy crap, that was a really good talk. So look forward to those. Stay safe out there, folks. If you're in America and you work in the government, do whatever you can behind the scenes to stop the fascism. And besides that, just enjoy this episode. Here we go. Jamie McKelvie. Which is weird. Okay, because I'm going to say this. From all the British TV that I watch, there's CCTV cameras everywhere. You're heavily surveilled. As are we, but it's more surreptitious in the United States. So
I think, weird. Yeah, I can't remember if it's London or the UK as a whole. I think it might be the UK as a whole that has the most CCTV per capita in the world. So maybe it's a reaction to that. Maybe because I'm kicking against that. I hate it. It's very odd. It's one of those things where, like, I was talking to a friend the other day, I'm really going on a tangent here, but different countries' ideas of, I suppose, freedom. Like in the UK, it's a push against the idea of like ID cards, but we're constantly videoed. In other countries, an ID card is fine, but the idea of being videoed all the time is awful. It's really weird how it differs per country, because he lives in Sweden now, and it's the flip completely. Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah.
It's one of those things I guess you're just used to it.
Yeah, it's all strange because these are all these kind of like very tiny skirmishes on the outskirts of the concept of freedom, whereas the rest of it is completely diminished. At least I can't speak for the
yeah.
UK. I mean, I follow as much UK news as possible. It seems like things are not wonderful under Keir. I mean, maybe better than the Tories, but
yeah, but he's not. I'll start on a rant if I go on for the next hour. So I'm starting. He's not what I want him to be. Let's leave it at that.
Yes. I think that's. Yeah, but I mean, ever since, I don't know how you feel politically, but like, I think ever since the establishment did away with Bernie and Corbyn, it's kind of just been like, all right, I don't know what to do. Not exactly sure what move to make here.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So it's interesting times ahead. Not great times ahead, I think, but yeah. It's a lot of it's been a long time coming as well. Like, just like you say, it's like encroachment, like little bits being chipped away of it, and you're just kind of left there going, now what? But we'll see, I guess.
Yeah,
that's a nice happy start to the chat.
Well, okay. I mean, this is just naturally where my brain goes, but also,
yeah.
I am curious. I think we're around the same age, and my idea of like what I wanted to do in life, and the idea of what I think art is, I was going to say good for, but I don't even think that, like, I don't think of art in terms of like utility. I think it's and meaningful, right? But like when I grew up, I was like, oh, well, there's space for me to make meaningful art in the world. And then the world changed, and I'm like, is there that space for me now? And I'm wondering if you had the same beliefs when you were younger, and if they've changed, or I'm just curious, like, where do you stand?
It's a very complicated one, I suppose. I mean, obviously, I think there's always the need for it, whether it's from someone like me or someone not like me, but it's harder to do now than ever. Like, if I think back to how, and I'm getting off the topic of like what I thought I was doing more than like the practicalities of it, but the way I came up and the way I started my career would be impossible for someone now in the same position, because, you know, it'd be impossible to live in the places I did for the money that I had, etc. The people that I met because of that, and all of these kind of things that just don't, unless you already got money.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't view art as like it has to do this thing. I think, like you say, it does many things. But I think that the problem we've got now is that increasingly the people that are able to make art are coming from a narrower perspective. Certainly in the UK, and I think it's the same in the US as well. And so it's harder to make art if you don't come from that, but then I guess that makes it more important. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's...
I don't know if there is an answer.
It's a big, complicated one.
Yeah. I'm just more curious about, like, when you were younger, when you were a kid, how was art presented to you? You know, and where did it develop in you where you're like, oh, this is something that I feel I need to make, or I this is in me and I have to get it out. Like, I don't even know how it presented itself to you or how it felt when you were younger.
It was a very sort of long road with a lot of detours, basically. So I didn't start drawing comics until I was 21, which is very late for most people in comics. I think a lot of people always wanted to do it since they were kids. So I started, I'm still unpacking a lot of it, I think, because I was diagnosed with ADHD 5 years ago. Okay. And so looking back at my childhood now and understanding what was actually going on rather than what I felt at the time is sort of an ongoing project. But what it felt like to me, so I was always, as a young kid, I was always interested in making things and drawing and thinking up stories and writing, and from a very, very young age. Like, I'm talking like my memory of childhood is patchy, but certainly like at least 5, 6. But I remember because it manifested sometimes in ways that weren't viewed as appropriate, by which I mean, I've got one very specific memory of I got into detention. I had to stay in over lunch when I was like 6 or 7. for like talking in class or something. And the teacher like set me the work to do, and I did the work in like 10 minutes because it wasn't difficult to me anyway. And I was just sat there, so I was like, well, I just started drawing because like I'm just sitting here by myself. And like he came in, saw that I was drawing, and like scrumpled up the paper and threw it away. He was furious that I was doing that, and it's like, well, I've done the thing you want me to do. Now so a lot of that like through, because I wasn't doing it in the time that I was supposed to do it or whatever at school. A lot of it was kind of suppressed. Not at home. At home it was different, but like it very much like the ways I expressed myself were sort of I learned to suppress them for a very long time. So that kind of delayed me quite a bit. But then I was also like into comics as a kid. So like the first comic I remember reading was actually the first issue of the UK Transformers comic.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And I don't know if you know like a lot of the history of the differences between the US and the UK ones. But for listeners, I should probably explain that UK comics traditionally come out weekly, US comics come out monthly. And when you're putting out US reprints in the UK, you can be in a situation where you haven't got enough material to fill the weeks. So they commission British writers and artists to do stories in between. And in the case of Transformers, those stories were a million times better. Frankly, they were like brilliant, really, really good. I don't know if you read it. Like a lot of it holds up now. Yeah. So like I remember reading that when I was like 6 or so, and like really into comics. And then my brother, who's 7 years older than me, we shared a room when we were kids, and so he would get 2000 AD. So I was reading 2000 AD far too young, especially at the time. It was definitely like a 6 or 7 year old shouldn't be reading this comic, but I was. So like Nemesis and Zenith and all those kind of things, and that was kind of my grounding in comics. I was definitely like copying the art and stuff, but I wasn't really giving it any serious thought. And then when I was about 12, I remember we went to Forbidden Planet in Cardiff, and I picked up the collection of the Paul Smith run on X-Men from the Ashes, which is all where Madeline Pryor comes and everything.
Yeah.
And to this day, that is like probably one of the biggest influences on me, because I mean, I love his style, but it also like felt really a lot of. I bounced off a lot of like superhero stuff before because I didn't really relate to it in a lot of ways. It didn't feel like the real world. But the Paul Smith stuff, like when they're out of costume stuff, they dress like individual people, and like it really felt like something really cool, I suppose. Like like Scott looked like he just stepped out of the Duran Duran video at one point on the yacht.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I'm sort of into that. But then I fell out of it because I got more into music and things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is it's quite similar to Kieran Gillen, who I work with a lot. We have quite similar stories in that respect. So our teen years are mostly filled with music.
What era is this? Like the 80s?
No, this was like the early 90s for me. So I'm a bit younger than Kieran. Like I think it would have been late 80s onwards. But for me, my first gig was Elastica in 93.
Okay. Yeah.
That was, I've been really heavy into music for a sort of bit before then. I would have been 13 then. And then at university, my girlfriend at the time introduced me to Sandman, and I was reading that. And then I got to the Mark Temple pages in the 9th volume. And that was a kind of like, I didn't realize comics could look like that. And that was the switch that made me really sort of take it seriously. So up until that, because it had all been sort of pushed down, and I did GCSE art, but I had an arts GCSE as the exam you take when you're 16. So it's like 2 years before that you do the art class. And that teacher was so terrible and so demoralizing that completely put me off drawing at all. And I really didn't draw between the ages of 10 and 21. So it kind of, it was like a long road to get there. And I do sometimes wonder, like, if things had been different, like if I spent that intervening time still drawing as much as I could have been, what would it be like now? But you can't change the past. And it worked out in the end, I guess. Yeah.
What was going on? Like if these series of contingent events, and I know this is maybe it's not answerable, but like if this series of contingent events didn't happen, was there a plan B? Was there something else you wanted to do? Was there something else you were being pushed into? or it was just this or nothing?
Yeah, so it was really just a sort of like, no, I had no other plans is the short answer, but very much like a sort of narrowing of the way the school system works here is you do, at high school, you do like a bunch of different classes until 14, and then you narrow down to 10 subjects until 16. And then if you continue, you narrow down to 3. And then when you go to university, you narrow down to 1. So like, it's, to me, it's a ridiculous system that you start making the choices affect the entire of your life when you're 14, but you do. And so at 16, I was like, I don't really know what I want to do. I guess I wouldn't mind doing English at university. So like my teacher at the time told me, oh, you can do, so there's 2 different types of English at A level, getting really into the UK educational system here, sorry. But there's English language and English literature. And my teacher said, oh, you can do English language and then do English at university. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. When it came around to choosing university, no, you can only do English at university if you've done English literature. So my teacher had cut that off for me completely by getting that wrong. I didn't have a great high school experience.
It seems.
And then, so with the A levels I had, I didn't have that many options. So I did sociology at university. And I think it's another one of those like how would it be different in different universe stories, because I don't think I should have gone to university on one level. I think at the time, especially, it was really pushed on most kids. That's what you have to do. They really were like they were pumping up university numbers and everything at the time, and jobs all required university experience, even if it had very little to do with the job. But so I went to university because of that, but I don't think I'd have gained anything from it, except that if I hadn't gone to university, I wouldn't have gone to Nottingham, and I wouldn't have gone into Page 45, and I wouldn't have discovered comics in the way that I did. So although I was just basically drifting along with no idea what to do, it did mean that I discovered what I discovered. And specifically with Page 45, it's one of those shops where, I went in and I was buying one of those Sandman books a week. And then once I finished, like a lot of other shops, that would have been it. It's like, well, I read Sandman, go on to the next thing. But the Steve at Page 45 was like, well, if you like that, you like this. And if you like that, you like this. And like developed a taste with me for all the stuff, which I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't gone to university. So there wasn't a plan B. Yeah, I did a bunch of various temp jobs just to have money after university, but nothing, no career sort of things. It was always like, will I try this? For better or worse, I did.
Yeah. Were there any redundancies though? Because I think about like, here's the dumb version for me, but like musical tastes. Like my musical tastes were slowly drifting towards indie rock, and it just happened to be that there were people in my life. My friend's older brother could feed us records, or or like we went to Lollapalooza in '95, and the second stage just had this explosion of like Superchunk was there, and that's where I discovered them and all this other kind of stuff. And I think I probably would have discovered these things anyway. There were enough redundancies in my life that this stuff that my musical tastes would have probably ended up in the same area anyway. Were there redundancies in your life for art or comics? Like, would you ended up maybe as a different kind of artist?
It's really hard to say because, as I say, that sort of, I was put off drawing by my experience at school. But obviously it was there waiting to be sparked again. So it's entirely possible, yeah. But I don't know if it would have, I don't know. Like I say, yeah, the interest was there all along. I've always wanted to make things. Like I always do make things, even when I'm not making comics, I'm making things. So that is always there. So some form of creation, I guess, whether it's art or something else, I don't know. Yes. But whether that would have been a career or not, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's difficult to say.
Yeah, but the desire is there in you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Do you know where that started? Do you know like what was the quote unquote original spark? I don't really think there is one, but like, do you remember an early?
Yeah, no, because like I say, it's always been there. And like I may have suppressed it for a long time, but it was always there. Even as a very young kid, I remember like making up stories and making up characters and things like that. So I can't remember far back enough to think what triggered it. yeah, it's always just been part of me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
When you're younger, as you're suppressing it, are you also suppressing your emotions? Like, is that all together? Like, you just push everything down?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So this is a big long story, but so ADHD is complicated and it's different for everybody. And so a lot of the time it gets picked up in boys, especially because they're outwardly hyperactive and whatever. But there's a part to ADHD which is called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is sort of like they're not sure whether it's like specifically part of the way your brain works or it's a reaction to the fact that when you're a kid with ADHD, you get a lot more negative responses to who you are because of it doesn't fit into what's seen as like a good kid. And that means that you have a really oversized reaction to negative responses. So what that meant for me was I was so terrified of getting in trouble as a kid that I just suppressed pretty much any sort of expression of like everything, I suppose. So yeah, it was definitely, there was a lot of, oh, this doesn't fit into what I'm supposed to be right now, or what like a kid in my position is supposed to react or think. So there was a lot of like pushing it down. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really, it's really, it's so my parents sent me a lot of my old school reports recently that they found in storage, and it's really interesting and infuriating, but interesting reading the school reports that are very clearly, this is a kid with ADHD, this is him suppressing it, and this is us telling him that's a good thing. Like the reports are like, oh, he's much better at this, and he's learning to whatever, like respond slower or not shout at the answers or blah 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 or not, and all of these things. It's like, well, that's my brain, and you're rewarding me not being me, which is very very tough to read when you're older and looking back at it, and how clear it all was, and no one picked up on it. Yeah, so I think that's one of the big things why I don't really regard school as a good experience. I mean, there's lots of complicated bits of that, but yeah. So even now, I'm still undoing it. Like post-diagnosis, it's only been 5 years properly understanding how my brain works. Yeah, it's a lot to undo. Yeah.
Did it change how you make art, how you draw? I don't mean like necessarily like the style, but I just mean like the process. Like once you understood kind of, or started to understand how your brain works, did that change anything in terms of process?
It's complicated because so in 2019 I finished work on The Wicked and Divine, which is the comic that me and Kieran did for the 5 years before that.
Yeah.
And then before that, I'd been working pretty much constantly for another 10 years. So I hadn't really had any breaks or anything for 15 years or so. And I was severely burnt out, which I'm not really recovered from now, to be honest. And so I don't think I'm now at a point where like I can separate my current process from the fact that I'm burnt out as well. So things take a lot longer. I've always been kind of scattered, obviously, because I'm part of ADHD, but like I hop around things a lot. Part of that is just like, yeah, I suppose the biggest difference is letting myself create that way without viewing it negatively or beating myself up over it. A lot of my process beforehand is, I mean, it's always been quite scattered, and it's not necessarily ideal for the people you're working with. But like I constantly was like rating myself for it. I'm not doing this the way that other people. It's easiest for other people. And I'm often late with things and everything. And being late for stuff still sucks. I still hate it, but like I also understand why that is now, and how much of that is in my control and how much of that isn't in my control. And the stuff that isn't in my control, I'm much better at, letting it happen the way it happens. And that, in a lot of ways, this is a complicated question. certainly I think my current work is like the strongest I've ever done. And I think a part of that is allowing myself to create the way I do.
Yeah.
And I'm not like rushing through things because I feel like I'm letting other people down by not doing that, I suppose, is one of the big things of it. And then allowing the connections to happen in my brain when they do and whatever. And so I'm still discovering it, I guess, the answer, because I still also have to figure out how to get past burnout when the the main, yeah, like
of course.
the main way of recovering from burnout is not doing anything.
Yeah. Also, what happened in 2020 that might not have given you any kind of respite from anything?
Yeah.
What might the last 4 years have been like where maybe you don't get any kind of break at all emotionally?
Yeah, it's really it's funny because like when Whip did finish, I was like, right, 2020 is the year I was going to like reconnect with people and like talk to people that I haven't talked to for ages because I'm always working, blah blah blah. And of course, that didn't happen. So that's all mixed up in it too. It doesn't make it easy. Yeah, but then I also think like I've never, and I'm sure this is true for any creative people, you're never making things in your ideal situation anyway.
No. Yeah.
And some people have it a lot worse than I do, and still make things. So there's also that part to it as well. Yeah.
So, okay, because a lot of this, I was a hyper kid. I don't think I have ADHD, but I'm empathizing with you on a. I was about to say hard. I'm really empathizing with you hard because it feels it's the same. I think I had the same. I was in the same. What word do I want to use? I was on the same continent as you, so not in the same city, maybe. But I was kind of a hyper kid, and I would. But I was good at school, so I was able to, because I did well, a lot of the teachers just let me do what I wanted, kind of. So I could be hyper and I could make jokes in class, and they were just like, "Oh, that's Andy." But I was like, I did well enough that they let it go. So I don't think I maybe got the same kind of reprimanding you did, and I didn't push it down as much. I pushed other things down. I repressed a lot of other emotions. But I didn't. I think what I'm feeling from you is that like I still didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I still knew that I liked creating things, but it didn't present itself as a possibility until much later in my life. And part of that was just, my parents like saying like you have to have like a normal job. And I'm kind of curious, what did your parents do when you were younger? And then how did they kind of say like what was possible for you?
Yeah. So my mum was a housing officer first for the council, and then when it became a private thing for a housing association. So she worked with like finding accommodation for homeless people and things like that, and families. And my dad was a social worker, so he worked with in child protection. So both, that kind of sort of public service job, I suppose you'd call that. And they were very like they were never unsupportive of me doing creative things, but there's also they wanted me to have, and I understand it from a parent's point of view. They wanted me to have a good, stable job, etc.
Sure.
They wanted me to. So for a long time when I was starting comics, I wasn't making any money on it at all. And there was a lot of like, well, when are you going to have a real job, blah, blah, blah. And wait, think about your future, blah, blah, blah. And that went on for quite a while. But like I say, I also understand it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when you look at it from the outside. Comics in general, it doesn't, but especially that when you're putting out things and like it's not making any money. It's funny though, because I actually got an email from my dad when I first did. I did a short story in Ultimate Spider-Man. Might that have been 2010-ish, maybe a bit. I can't remember, around then. And he emailed me to say, "Oh, sorry for always asking him to get a real job," because he'd heard of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, that's the
that
thing.
made it a real
if they
job.
have a touchstone,
Yeah.
right? Most of my career in TV writing has been selling a show that never gets greenlit. So my parents have a really difficult time latching onto that.
Yeah.
Whereas my wife is more front facing because she's an actor and a stand up. So they can see a special of hers on Netflix or something like that, but they can't.
Yeah.
I can't. What am I supposed to do? Like show them a contract? Like, look, I did get paid. I sold this thing. They just didn't want to make it. Like I did. There's a thing.
It's funny because that's one of the things I've always felt like I don't know how you deal with it in TV, because with comics at a certain level anyway, generally speaking, if you make something, it gets put out. You know, there's rare times where something gets shelved after you finish the whole thing. And I can't imagine how frustrating it is. Like all these things you've created, and like you can't do anything with them. And you get paid, which is nice for sure. And that doesn't always happen in comics, so even when it comes out. But yeah, that's one of the things I've always loved about comics is that generally speaking, and even, you know, especially now with like web comics and things, there's very little barrier to, like, if you want to make something, you want people to read it. It might not be a huge audience, but you can have people reading it straight away, which is one of the joys of it. But yeah, so like I'd done a bunch of stuff before that. You know, I think I'd even done some X-Men stuff or something where they didn't know what X-Men was. But yeah, it was the touchstone. It's like, oh yeah, I know what this is. You know, now, and they're extremely proud of me now, and like they're very like all their walls in their house have got like loads of my art and everything. But it did come from a place, like I say, of like worrying about my well-being. But yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. It comes from a good place. Was your dad's experience? Did you ever watch that TV show Damned by Joe Brand?
I didn't know.
Oh, it's great. It's brilliant. Yeah. But it's basically, it's like, it's only 2 series long. So it's not, you know, you can watch it in a weekend if you want, but, takes place in I guess a social, a child welfare office type. I don't know what it's called in the UK, but, it's great. Highly recommended.
I have to look at it. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question about my dad's?
Oh no, I was asking if well, if you've never seen it, then I don't know how you answer.
No, so I can't answer that. No. It's certainly it's a very complicated, very difficult job, and like so he was emergency child protection, so like he had to deal with some really, really awful situations, and it was a very demanding job. Like a lot of the time, he wouldn't be coming home at night until like 11 or something, sometimes, or even later. And it's certainly something that made me think, like, that is not a job I want to do. It's funny because I ended up in sociology, which would lead you to being a social worker all the time. And I was aware at the time, like, no, this is not the path I want to go down because I saw what he did to Dad.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it was invaluable work, obviously. And like, you know, he's saved so many lives and changed so many lives. But like, yeah, it's just, you see the worst side of humanity, you know, on a regular basis. And it's just, it was very much like, I can't do that kind of thing.
When you were growing up, was he drained? Because it seems like I've seen people who work in, my mother-in-law works in family court in the Bronx. And she, like the awful stuff she sees that she tells us about regularly. I'm just like, oh my God, that has to be a huge drain on yourself, on your body, on your emotional life.
Yeah, it really was. Like, I think he had kind of sort of nervous breakdown mid 90s. But it's a big, complicated story that we don't have time to get into here about his job in that respect. But yes, he did his best to keep it from us, for sure. But even little things like, so we go on a holiday once a year. We drive the car down to France and go to a campsite and have it, sort of spend 3 weeks in a tent. And I always remember, like, it would literally take him the first half of the holiday just to unwind to a place where he could enjoy the holiday, which I didn't understand as a kid. Obviously, I really understand it now. Yeah. So, like, it was a really, really tough. Yeah.
Because I'm just trying to get a sense. By the way, where do you grow up? London?
No, so I was born in London. I was born in Greenwich, and we lived there until I was about 2, and then we moved to a place called Malvern in Worcestershire. His dad got a job in Worcester, which is next to Malvern. And Malvern, so it's kind of quite a small place. I think it's like right now, I think there's like 30,000 people live there or something. So at the time, it would have been about 20,000, and it's a small town on the side of these hills, the Malvern Hills. Like an like Victorian spa town, you know, the water cure thing where the Victorians believed that if you bathed in spa water, it would cure everything. So there's a lot of that like leftover Victorian stuff there, architecture and things. And yeah, I grew up there until I went to university and then never went back. I guess it was a nice place to grow up as a kid, but as a teenager, it became very boring. Which I'm sure is the same for a lot of kids growing up in small towns, you know. So I sort of escaped the first chance I could get. Yeah. I went back to London. So I went to Nottingham for university, and then I lived for a year in Birmingham with my band at the time. And then I moved to London, and I was in London until 2018, and then I moved to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and I've been there since. So small town, back to London. Yeah.
Now in Scotland. When you were in a band, was that ever like, oh, maybe this is going to be the thing, or was it just always kind of like on the side?
No, it was. Yeah. So it was band I formed at school, and then we kept together in university. And it's funny. So I didn't really make a lot of connections at Nottingham University, so I didn't really feel at home there. But the singer of my band, he went to Wolverhampton University, and so I spent a lot of time there, and I'm still friends with people from there now. Like, I really sort of connected there a lot more. So we played a lot of gigs around Birmingham and everything. And then, so we all got in the house together, and we were quite successful on that scene in Birmingham. And then, I don't know, I moved to London. I moved in with my girlfriend at the time, and I wanted everybody else to come down too, and they didn't want to. And that was sort of that, because I played drums. And like, that made it impossible for me I tried to come up and practice a couple of times everything, but like, when you've got a drum kit, going between cities and things is pretty much impossible. In fact, we moved to such a small place in London, I had to sort of get rid of the drum kit anyway. So I was like using the ones at the practice places, but the whole thing just became logistically really difficult. And I drifted away from it, and I hadn't really played since, which is a shame. But it was a bit frustrating, but also, I don't know. But yeah, it was, I'm trying to think how to put it. Yeah, it was something we were like taking fairly seriously. You know, we all lived together. We practiced a lot. We were doing quite well in that scene, but because it was like a 2000s era, like punk band, that kind of music, which was quite a big thing in the Midlands, especially at the time. Midlands, like Birmingham and places like that.
Is this like the post-punk resurgence, or?
Yeah. So all the stuff that sort of came after grunge in America, I guess. And grunge kind of bypassed me because Britpop was so dominant in the UK. And then Britpop sort of faded out, and then that was and I fell out of that music quite soon after that. But yeah, that was sort of, that era.
Yeah. It's funny, we're going through like the third resurgence of post-punk now, especially there's like a lot of British, I don't know if you're calling them third wave, but in my mind, I'm calling them like third wave post-punk bands.
Oh man, I struggle with genre names. They get so splintered these days as well, and like trying to think of new ways to describe things. Like, oh my God, a couple of years ago, I was looking at some music that I like, and the genre was like listed as like dark synth wave, and I was like, I felt so like a parody of myself. Like, oh yeah, this is the music. Oh my God, this is the music I like. But yeah, like, I don't know. I give up with sounding like a dad. If I like it, I like it. But I struggle to keep up with the names of the genres now.
Yeah, no. I'm just trying to figure out, like, you know, what is the soup you were kind of forming in, or that you were in? Because, you know, does the energy that you're putting into a band, does that energy then go into drawing? Or
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of similarities as well. Like, you're putting something out that you want people to. Oh, that sounds like such a cliche. Want people to connect to, you know, like you're making these things like almost in a way. This is who I am. Like, does anybody else understand that? I suppose.
Yeah.
On the basic level, and so for sure, there's definitely like it's a reflection of who you are, I think, or who I am. Anyway, I wouldn't speak to anybody else, I guess. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is
because it's.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, it's if you look at, like, my life overall, you definitely see, like, it was art, and then it was music, and then it was art again, and now it's like, I don't make music, obviously, music's always still a massive part of my life, but there's always been, like, it definitely was one switch to the other, switch back. So it was, yes, it's the short answer.
I am curious, because I spent a lot of my life repressed.
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of got that diagnosis, two things. One, how did it reframe your past? And two, how did it open up things in your future? I don't mean just like when I asked before about your process, I don't just mean that. I just mean like, how did that change how you exist in the world once you kind of understood yourself?
There's a lot of emotions attached to diagnosis and a lot of responses to it. They're all kind of mixed together, which makes it kind of complicated to process. Like there's the relief that there's an answer to all these questions you've got about yourself, and sort of like hope, I suppose, for like, oh, there's things I can do to make things better for myself. But then there's a lot of grief in the sense that if I had discovered this earlier, how different might my life have turned out? And so a lot of thinking back is based around that, I suppose. Like, you know, if I'd understood this about myself, I could have handled this situation differently or done that differently. And how would life be now? And obviously, ultimately, you can't know that because you can't change the past. But it's certainly, it's a big thing, especially at first. Like, it's always there, I think. But especially at first, when you get a diagnosis, is one of the big things that hits you. Yeah, so like looking back at the past is sort of through that telescope, I suppose. Telescope's not the right word. Anyway, that focus.
So one of the things that really stuck with me was you saying how, you know, you had this kind of outsized reaction to if you did something wrong or feeling bad if you did something, you know. I have that same thing. And for a long time, I would argue someone to the death because I couldn't be wrong in an argument. Or if I did something wrong, it took a long time for me to have to acknowledge it. And because I was like, this feeling of being wrong feels so bad that I can't feel it. I have to do whatever I can to avoid that feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, how did before you kind of understood it as part of? I mean, I don't know what it is for me. It's just not wanting to be wrong. I mean, it's just being lawyerly, I suppose, which is what my parents thought I was going to be. But like, how did you understand that before you kind of saw it as part of having ADHD?
As a flaw in me, as something was wrong with me, like in the sense that like it was always me messing up. Especially as that is sort of combined with, there's a lot of reasons that ADHD makes social interaction more difficult. And so like I always struggled especially in groups of people I don't know, whatever. But like maintaining friendships and things like that, for various reasons with ADHD, that's more difficult. And it always manifested in my brain as like, oh, this is my fault. This is something wrong with me. So obviously that's quite a lot to deal with when it's constant for 40 years. And that does take a lot of time to undo, even when you know the reasons for things. Like I understand like why I have trouble with social cues sometimes and why conversations don't necessarily go, or when conversations go in a different way than I'm expecting, I don't know how to deal with it. And even things like, because I have no sense of time or anything, like if I don't talk to somebody for a year or so, for me, we're still the same sort of level of connection, but for a lot of people, that's degraded. And so, like, not understanding why I couldn't maintain friendships and things, I understand now, and I work harder to try and circumvent those things. But it's still sort of sometimes difficult to not see that as a flaw in yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so there's a lot to undo. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is interesting. The idea of like having a different, I was going to say conception of time. It's not conception. It's a feeling of time, right? It's a different way of understanding time. You know, when you were younger, does that mean you were easier? I don't know how to answer, if you can answer this. Could you slip into fantasy worlds easier? Can you slip when you're making art also? Can you slip into the flow of making things in an easier way? Or, I mean, I'm just curious about how this kind of like feeling of time, this different feeling of time that you have manifests itself in both your artistic work.
It's complicated, again, as with all things with ADHD. There's a lot of contradictions. So like, yeah, with time, like it's a very simplistic way of describing it. For a lot of ADHD people, including me, there's like now and not now. Those are the two times. So like if something's a week ahead or something's like 3 weeks ahead or a year ahead, those really don't mean anything to me, which can be frustrating for other people, especially, you know, we're talking about like future plans or whatever. But I do fall into like, the thinking of stuff like that, yes, very easily. But one of the problems with an ADHD brain is and again, I'm getting really simplistic, but like the switch between thinking and doing is broken, basically. So like it's much harder to get started to turn what you're thinking on about into something you're doing. So like the actual act of creation, the physical act of it is very difficult for me to get started. But once I have got started, then I get into hyperfocus, which is the ADHD thing where you're super focused. Like, so it's a really badly named condition. It's not attention deficit. It's difficulty in controlling where your attention lies. So like most of the time, my attention is everywhere all at once. So like, if I'm in a busy place, I can hear all the conversations around me as much as I can hear the person in front of me. And that's very difficult to.
Yeah.
But then when you go to hyperfocus, you don't notice anything else, just the thing in front of you. And so when I'm really in the creative mode, I can be in hyperfocus for hours. And then that comes to the problem because it'd be like I'll be working for 3 or 4 hours and then I suddenly look up and like, all right, I really, really need the toilet. And I've clearly needed the toilet for a while, but I didn't notice because I was in this zone. Or I'm really hungry and I didn't notice. So once I'm in it, it's very easy to just be in it. But getting to that point can be very difficult, on a daily basis, but also on a longer term basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's complicated. Yeah.
And talking to you, I'm just like, if this is a spectrum, I'm definitely like on the outskirts of this, because a lot of your stuff you're saying is like kind of familiar to me, but I am able to choose where to focus my attention. Like I think that.
Yeah. I mean, so ADHD, like I say, there's several points there. Yes, it is a spectrum. There's like a lot of different traits. I don't want to call them symptoms because some of them are symptoms and some of them are just, this doesn't work with how society is currently set up. There's a theory that like people with ADHD were the people who would like keep an eye on when everybody else is asleep in the tribe, like looking out for danger and whatever. Makes a lot of sense. We stay up later, we're noticing everything. When things go into crisis mode, we become very focused in a way that we aren't normally, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how much, proof there is for it. It does seem to make sense. But there's a lot of different traits, and every person with ADHD has different levels of them. Simplistically, there's like the hyperactive side and the inattentive side are the two poles, and it goes between. But also, yeah, different people. Like Kieran has also got ADHD in his exhibits in a very different way. You can't say that he isn't very prolific because he's constantly working, partly because he's developed systems to do that, but also like that side of it isn't as difficult for him as me. But also I would say that we're very overrepresented in creative fields. So like writing and art and music and comedy. And I think there are several reasons for that. One of them is I don't want to like ascribe my creativity to ADHD, but it certainly helps because my brain is always firing off in different directions and making connections that don't always appear to other people. And I certainly think that's part of creation, a big part of it. And then there's things like we don't do very well in 9 to 5s, so we have to try and find other jobs. There's all these sort of things, like our focus like jumps, like we get interested in new things all the time. So, that aids creation. So like, I'm not saying you do have it, but I'm also saying, given your career, I wouldn't be surprised. It's really funny. So I'm very public about it because one of the reasons I didn't discover it for so long was because I had a misconception of what the symptoms were. And then when I was about 40, I read an article from a guy who got diagnosed when he was in his 40s. And one of the things was like, I put down I lose my keys all the time and I don't know where I put them every single time. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize memory problems were part of ADHD. And yeah, they're a massive problem for a lot of people. And like, so I'm vocal about it because a lot of people don't realize what the reality of it is. They just the stereotype of the boy running around. And a lot of people believe it goes away when you get older, and it doesn't. You just develop mechanisms to cope with it.
Yeah.
But you don't realize that's what you're doing all the time. So as a result, I've literally had hundreds of people now tell me that they've now been diagnosed because of me talking about it and them understanding it, which is brilliant. But then I was just thinking, like, I sort of set off a chain reaction amongst a lot of comedian friends who then discovered, and now I'm just like, every time I watch a stand up or something, I'm like, yeah, you're one of us for sure.
James A. Have ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Josie Long, she's one of the people who got diagnosed with me. Yeah. So she talks about how, she's brilliant. She talks about how I made her discover it. She did an interview fairly recently on Lauren Laverne, I think, talking about it. And then so our friend Robin Ince recently and it's so good to see from the outside the change in people as well. Like someone like Robin, especially. Robin Ince, he's a really wonderful comedian. He does this thing.
Infinite Monkey Cage.
Yes. Yeah. And I've known him for a long time, and he always used to be, I don't know if you've ever seen his stand-up, but I don't think I've ever seen him complete a show, like finish the show as it was supposed to be finished, because he'll always go on tangents and everything. And it's absolutely wonderful. It's brilliant. It's really brilliant. But like, it's different every time because he'll go off on tangents and things. But also he was very, very self-negative, like really beating himself up over stuff a lot, and seeing the change in him now and like embracing it. And it is just amazing. And yeah, being able to have that kind of effect on people is just, really cool. Really, really cool.
Yeah. Okay. Last question then, because the memory thing that you said is really interesting to me, because I'm kind of curious, when you say you forget where your keys are, like, I mean, I always try to put my keys back in the same place every time, just so that I don't have to worry about it. But I don't know if it's like as much of a problem. But I was just thinking of, is it that you're not present? Is that what's happening? Like your brain is like off going in other things, and that's why you're not remembering where it is? Or
it's
like, I'm just trying to figure out, because the larger question is then, well, how, if your memory, if you're not really like capturing these things, or I don't know how it works, how do you understand yourself as a person?
It's very difficult. So with the memory, there's several things going on. Sometimes it is, yes, you're paying attention to other things, but also with ADHD, the working memory is often faulty, so you can't hold things in your head in that respect. And they're also, I mean, memory is several different things all interacting with each other, but it also affects your long-term memory. So like, I can't remember about that thing. Sometimes that's because I don't remember it happening at the time, because it doesn't go in the working memory and they get translated into the long-term memory. Sometimes I just forget things. And then there's connected to that is also, it's difficult to form routines with ADHD. So it's possible to create routines such as, like you say, putting your keys in the same place every time. I know that I've got a place to put the keys. Doesn't always happen. It's just very frustrating. But yeah, self-reflection or understanding yourself can be very difficult with ADHD. And it's actually interesting, because I think one of the things that helps is externalizing things. And this can be as simple as sometimes in the shower or something, I'll literally say out loud, I'm putting shampoo on, so I remember that I've washed my hair, because sometimes I just won't. But externalizing it makes me remember it. So like, and those sort of behaviors you sort of get shamed out of when you're younger if you don't understand why you're doing it. It's like, oh, that's weird. So why are you doing that? So you stop doing it. But now I understand my brain better, then screw anybody who thinks it's weird. It works for me. And I also think the act of creation is a part of that as well, that helps you understand yourself more. Like I think that relates to how I write, in the sense that like, I don't go into a project knowing everything I'm going to be saying with it, or what it's really about. And I discover that through the writing. And I think that is very much tied to how my brain works in general, like externalizing things. So my friend Kelly Sue DeConnick, also fairly recently diagnosed. She has always done this thing which she calls talking to the duck, which is she had like a toy duck on her desk, and by like explaining a problem in a writing or something to the duck, gave her the answer, because she's externalizing it. She didn't realize why that was working for her at the time, but I think now she does. And I think, so like keeping things internal, and which you do, especially when you're repressing everything, makes it very difficult for anybody, I think, but also especially for ADHD people, to understand yourself. So like, I suppose creation is partly a way of understanding myself. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, this was an absolute delight. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye.